Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Cases. I'm Shant Kerbabian. Sexual harassment is bullying or coercion of a sexual nature, or the unwelcome or inappropriate promise of rewards in exchange of sexual favors. In most modern legal contexts, sexual harassment is illegal. Now, also as defined by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, sexual harassment is any unwelcome sexual advance, request, or sexual favor, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. Now, most recent reports on sexual harassment in Egypt draw a dim picture of women's status, not only in the country, but also in all the parts of the region. Now, a recent United Nations study revealed that 99.3% of Egyptian women have experienced some form of sexual harassment in the past year, primarily in the form of physical harassment. A recent public opinion survey also showed that 85% of Egyptian women surveyed agree sexual harassment is the most urgent problem facing women and girls in transitional Egypt, despite the prevailing political and social instability in the country. Now, most importantly, harassment has become an impediment for both economic and social development in the Middle East, a critical issue that requires immediate attention from policymakers, legislators, and society as a whole. Now, today we tackle the case of sexual harassment in the Middle East and try to discuss the reasons behind this phenomenon, the effects, and how we can put an end to it. With us to discuss today's issue in studio is Ms. Zeina Mohanna, human rights specialist, and also joining us via satellite from Egypt is Mr. Mohanad El-Sangary, an anti-sexual harassment activist. I would like to welcome my guests. Welcome. Now, before we get to our discussion, we'll have a report. Let's take a listen.
The Thomson Reuters Foundation has conducted its third annual poll, which was managed and supervised by gender experts and gave a glimpse of the women's rights in the Arab states 3 years after the Arab Spring and as Syria's conflict threatens further regional turmoil. According to the poll, the state of women is the worst in Egypt among the Arab world, as high levels of sexual harassment and female genital mutilation increased after the rise of the Islamists following the 2011 revolution. The poll referred to instability and conflict in the country as some of the reasons for that deterioration. Gender experts also mentioned discriminatory laws, as well as a surge in trafficking as negative signs. On the other hand, Syria has been known in the past for its relatively liberal attitudes towards women, particularly in major cities such as Damascus. However, the surge in the Islamic groups there and the introduction of the Sharia law in some regions now controlled by insurgents has rolled back progress in the field of gender equality. The report has also accused government forces of raping and torturing women, according to rights groups, while displaced women in refugee camps were left vulnerable to trafficking, forced and child marriage, and sexual violence. The poll assessed violence against women, reproductive rights, treatment of women within the family, their integration into society, and attitudes towards a woman's role in politics and economy. In light of all what's been mentioned, what is the work of international and local non-governmental organizations in the Arab countries in this regard?
Welcome, gentlemen, and Ms. Zeina, also welcome back again. Now, let's get right into this issue, sexual harassment. The numbers, especially, like we know sexual harassment is a phenomenon occurring in different parts of the world, and it's not specifically in the Middle East. But we're trying to focus on the Middle East because the numbers in Middle East are horrific. And we know that there's political turmoil, and we know that the situation is horrific in a lot of countries. But what is it about this phenomenon, and what is it about the Middle East that allows this phenomenon to exist, not just to exist, but also to develop?
Thank you first for tapping on this topic that is really very important, and it's very important to start more investigation about it. Unfortunately, sexual harassment in the Arab world is still considered as a taboo. And we know that the 4 kinds of violence that are happening, which can start from the sexual to the physical to the verbal and even to the emotional, are really high in the Middle East in general, and very few research are there, and very few people reported back. So it is
the reason is because it's still considered a taboo to talk about
exactly this. And there is still a fear from this patriarchal society that is there to reveal, and there is a need for high empowerment for women. Unfortunately, now the Arab world is facing lots of emergencies, and we know that women and children are the most vulnerable when emergencies take place. And this is where now, with the Syrian crisis that is affecting sexual and gender-based violence, is raising even higher. So there is important to, and we know that sexual harassments could tap into human trafficking, could tap into child labor, all forms of women and child exploitation that aggravates and have very heavy loads on the psychology and on the physical development of these groups. So there is need for much more efforts in this regard on several levels that we can discuss about.
Yeah, but like in my opinion, there's even a need of immediate actions that have to happen. But let's leave that point aside. The reason in my introductions I had two different definitions of sexual harassment, because there's this some sort of idea or misconception of sexual harassment. When we say sexual harassment, people in the Middle East usually their understanding is that it has to be physical. And it's not like if it's about like certain words you say in the street or certain thing. It's the look, it's the words you say. So I made sure the introduction. What other forms of sexual harassment we can mention?
Definitely. Now the sexual harassment, and even we have the female genital mutilation, which is happening in around 28 countries between Africa and the Arab world, and this is a very high number. Sexual harassment is happening, it is underreported, and it's coming for several reasons. Culturally, women are not much aware about the impact of violence, and the sexual harassment is happening, as we're seeing in Egypt, in the streets, which is verbal abuse or even flirting, or which is because now we're seeing that many majority of the people, when the sun goes down, they don't go out. So this is one way of protection. And the issue of the Syrian refugees now, which is happening into the camps, and we know that violence increases due to several reasons, although there is need for protection for women. We know that in normal days there are the sexual harassment in the workplace, where women are threatened to lose their job if they don't comply with the person who is offering the kind of abuses. Another thing now that we can differentiate, especially in times of crisis, especially now with the Syrian component, which is the survival sex, where the family, especially the women who lost their husbands in the fightings and are women head of household, who are there and need to have an income, so their only option is survival sex to ensure an income, and this could go into mafias and human trafficking, and and here comes the question about the legal protection.
Exactly.
How much the victim is protected and not taken to trial, where there is need to investigate more about the people who are conducting.
The question is the victim protected? Like are the victims, for example, since you mentioned the Syrian component in Lebanon, are the victims protected in Lebanon?
There are efforts among UN organizations and the NGOs in general, non-governmental organizations, to ensure that there is awareness among the personnel of the detention centers, personnel who are following gender security. There is a need to ensure much more efforts in this regard. And even there is a need from the governments to ensure that they sign the international human rights documents, they ratify them, and they ensure enforcement for the law, for follow-up to the traffickers and to these mafias who ensure that sexual harassment is high. But sexual harassment comes from different components, and there is a need to empower women at one instance. There is a need to empower women not only among their awareness, but also from economical empowerment, because woman needs to know to have an income, and this will empower her to say no. This
point and what has to be done specifically, like when it comes to awareness, education, economy, we'll discuss about later on in the show. Now, allow me now to go to our guest in Egypt, Mr. Mohanad El-Sangary. Mr. Mohanad, welcome to Cases, and thank you for joining us. Mr. Mohanad, the situation in Egypt is reaching a horrific stance and horrific point, and as we can see in different reports, especially when it comes to sexual harassment, it is now very dangerous for women, and women fear of going out alone in the streets after 5, 6, 7 p.m. What is the situation on ground, and how dangerous it is? The situation is for women.
Unfortunately, I mean, the situation for women in Egypt have like deteriorated gradually since even before the revolution, but it became more apparent after the revolution because of security situation in the country. What happened in the country was a dangerous turn of events. Sexual harassment was always apparent in the streets of Egypt, but like since the revolution, it started taking. I don't like to pinpoint one reason as the reason for sexual harassment. There are societal reasons for social harassment. There are legislative reasons, because I don't think that there are 3 laws in effect in Egypt that deal with sexual harassment. The 3 of them aren't phrased properly to deter the sexual harassers, and they aren't executed on the ground. What happened in Egypt is that people started normalizing the phenomenon of sexual harassment. So unfortunately, the bystanders, if let's say for example, if a woman gets harassed in the street, if she screams thief, like she has a better chance of the bystanders actually like running to help than if she screamed harassment, because people started gradually to lose this. To lose part of their identity, to see sexual harassment as an everyday happening, not a big thing, not a big deal, which caused women to suffer greatly in the past few years. I mean, like women, like the simplest thing, someone getting out from work or school, going home, like simply like walking on a sidewalk, seeing a group of young men on the sidewalk, then she shifts to the other side of the street because she's afraid that she might get harassed. A woman walking to her car at night. I mean, she's looking to the upcoming traffic. She's worried that any car like slows down and starts catcalling. So like women are in genuine fear for their safety. I don't like it to make it more than it is. I mean, like women live. It's not as mentioned before that women cannot get out of their house at 5 or 6.
I didn't say they can't. I said they fear. I didn't say they can't, Mr. Mohanad.
Yes.
I said they fear of going out after that time of the day.
Yes, unfortunately they do, because somehow the culture in Egypt have started shifting gradually, and the people did no longer view sexual harassment as a serious offense, which is something that we are trying to change. I mean, since the revolution, all the movements, all the NGOs aiming to fight sexual harassment, they're aiming to do different things. Like the NGO I'm a part of Basma Imprint, we're trying to do actual walk in the street, like to raise awareness, to do walk in the tube and the metro. In Egypt, for example, we have separate cars in the metro for women. More than often, men climb into these cars. And women, like the thing is that women themselves don't speak out when men get into the metro cars that are supposed to be for women. We started awareness campaigns in the metro, like telling women that they should fight for their rights. We started awareness campaigns in the main streets.
Mr. Mohanna, allow me to interrupt you here. Let's say, like, where does the role of the authorities come here? Let's say a woman is sexually harassed and she needs to report it. How cooperative the authorities are? How protected women are in terms of legally or when it comes to the authorities?
Unfortunately, more than often, authorities aren't very cooperative when it comes to sexual harassment reports. Sometimes, I'm not generalizing, because sometimes the police officers filing the report, they do act on it, they do try to step in the case to arrest the harasser, but more than often, unfortunately, it's not very effective filing a police report. But anyway, we always try to encourage the victim to file a police report. Because most of the time there is some kind of a shame culture in Egypt. If you get sexually harassed, then it's your fault. We're trying to change that culture to make women go ahead and speak out. Sometimes, yes, the police do act, but unfortunately, the way the laws are in Egypt, though there are laws against sexual harassment, they aren't adequate. And they aren't executed on the ground, even like the current laws that aren't adequate, they aren't executed on the ground. I mean, and some of those laws are like, unfortunately a joke. Like, for example, rape. Anal rape isn't considered rape under Egyptian law. It's considered a lesser sexual assault.
Okay.
Punishable by only up to 3 years in prison.
Okay. Okay. Ms. Zeina, we've seen this case, and one of the interesting things that Mr. Mohanad mentioned is that whenever something happens, any incident of harassment, even rape, it's always the women's fault. It was your fault, and a lot of statements, you asked for it because you were dressed in a certain way. How can we counter this argument? Is it really the women's fault?
Something that we need to be really aware about is that women count in the Arab world more than 50% of the total population, and this is not a number that could be underestimated. And we know in the patriarchal society, women have really a high impact on the families and the development of the children. So women do really have a big role in terms of the development of the generation. And the housewives, we know in Europe they count the woman who is in the house as a full-timer, and she is included in the development of the country, whereas in the Arab world, housework is not considered as work. So, and this big difference has a very high impact. And now with the economy that is deteriorating, you have women who work a full-time job inside the house and full-time job outside the house, and she is really physically drained with everything that she has on her back. However, this patriarchal society and the mentality that Mohanna talked about, which is women are always vulnerable, this primarily goes back to the woman who is not aware about her rights, who's not aware that there are international human rights documents that support her. And even when it goes back to the courts, and where whatever case it is, divorce or she's facing a certain issue, she is always guilty until proven innocent, whereas the man in front of a court is innocent until proven guilty. And this way of approaching women starts really being unfair to women instead of protecting them. The humanitarian organizations try to support, but there is a big need to push for this culture change, to change the mentality, and women have a role in changing this.
Now, we're going to go to this point, like how we can change the mentality and the women's role, but we have to stop here because we're going to take a short break. Ladies and gentlemen, after the break, we have a little short, interesting movie that we're going to project to you, and you can see the effects of sexual harassment after the break. Stay tuned.
Women's rights redefined.
The crisis of capitalism, the European impasse, the energy shortages, the emerging power of Asia, the economic power of the Arab world, the economic debate, informative, revealing, and progressive. It discusses the economic event of the world.
Economic debate, where the numbers reveal the truth.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now we have a small chunks of a short movie that will project to you the effect of sexual harassment that it might have on the lives of the women exposed to it. Let's take a look.
عندي 23 سنة وبشتغل فيلم ميكر. التحرش حاجة يومية بتحصل لكل بنت أو ست في مصر، بس اللي حصل يوم 2/6 معايا ده كان مفاجأة فظيعة، يعني مش متوقعة إن ممكن بالشكل ده الناس كلها تتفق على إنها تعمل حاجة زي كده في لحظة واحدة ومفيش حاجة توقفهم. يعني هما كان عندهم استعداد إن أنا أموت في إيديهم عادي يعني. القصة بدأت هنا بالظبط يوم 2/6، كانت الساعة حوالي 10:30 بالليل. كنا هنا عند هارديز أنا وواحدة صاحبتي وولدين صحابنا. الدنيا كانت زحمة طبعا كالعادة يعني في الميدان، بس دي مش أزمة يعني، هو دايما زحمة. شوية ناس كتير بدأت تتلم حوالينا، اللي هو نعمل دايرة حوالين البنات عشان نعديهم، يعني حاجة بالمعنى ده. بدأوا هما نفسهم يتجمعوا حوالينا ويمدوا ايديهم، بدأنا نتجر على جوه ناحية المجمع، وبعدين انا بقيت لوحدي فبشكل كده مش مفهوم. بعد شوية وقت كتير انا بتجر فيه وبتقطع وبتضرب وبالساحل وبيحصل كل الحاجات. شوية وظهر موتوسيكل، انا مش عارفة هو طلع منين، بس انا لقيت حد بيشدني وبيحطني فوق الموتوسيكل، والموتوسيكل جري. انا مسكت جدا في الولد، ما كنتش عارفه اي حاجه مين ده ولا هيوديني فين، بس هو واحد وهيخرجني من هنا، يعني يوديني اي حته لو هيقتلني، بس مش مشكله يخرجني من المكان ده. وقف قدام البنزينه ونزلني عشان البس هدومي، لان اغلبها كان متقطع وواقع وكده. فدخلت جوه الاوضه بتاعت الاداريين اللي جوه، اوضه ازاز كده. وبعدين فجاه بدات اسمع دوشه بره، فببص على الازاز لقيت ان كله عباره عن وشوش ناس كتير جنب بعض، كلهم واقفين على باب الازاز وبيخبطوا. في حد على الباب من تقريبا الناس اللي جوه البنزينه بيحاول يوقف الناس ان هي تدخل، يعني ان هي تكسر الباب وتدخل. وحسيت ان انا هتخنق، يعني اكيد هموت جوه البنزينه، يعني باب ازاز وسهل جدا يتكسر. يعني كنت بحاول استخبى، بحاول ازنق نفسي في اي ركن، بس يعني ما كانش منطقي خالص، كنت باينه يعني. بعدين شويه وانا يعني ما فهمتش قوي ايه اللي كان بيحصل، بس فجاه لقيت في ضابط جوه الاوضه قومني وقال لي ان احنا يعني خرجني وهياخدني على الاسم. رحنا في ناحيه اسم قصر النيل. كنت انا والظابط، هو كان بيجرني جدا وبيشدني علشان يلحق يهرب من الناس اللي بدات تجري وراه وبدات تهتف ضده. في الاسم المعامله يعني بتاعت الضباط كانت لطيفه جدا. ما كانش مفهوم طبعا فكره ان هم مصممين يعملوا محضر، لان في ضابط ضرب نار. انا ما كنتش عايزه اعمل محضر، لان المحضر ملوش اي معنى بالنسبه لي، يعني مفيش حد حرر محضر ضده. انا مش فاكره اي وش، ما شفتش اي حد تقريبا، مفيش اي وش كنت فاكراه، مفيش اي مواصفات من اي نوع اقدر اديها. يعني كل اللي هم قدروا يعملوه ان هم ياخدوا مواصفات شنطتي اللي اتسرقت، يعني دي الحاجه الوحيده اللي كانوا يقدروا يعملوها لي ان هم يجيبوا.
Welcome back. I don't know what to say after watching like the clip. Like, this is the story, and this is one small story of a lot of cases happening every day. You comment on this little chunk of this short movie.
Actually, I'm very happy of the courage of this lady who spoke about it, and I think we need much more women to speak about their cases, what happened with them, because this is the start of remedies, and this is the start of their protection. Women need to speak about what's happening with them, need to report in details what are happening, and this will help international donors, humanitarian organizations to move quickly. And her courage is important, but we could see, we did not see her face, but it's very obvious the impact of what happened with her, although it didn't go to the end, although the police rescued her at the end. These female are faced with health issues if rape took place, being bleeding or being deterioration of their genital organs that could ruin their life forever. They can't marry, they can't have babies.
And let alone the psychological effect that this could have on the rest of her life.
Definitely, this is the most important component, which is the trauma that she's taking, and how much this trauma is impacting her life, where she is faced with isolation, where she's faced with a lack of self-confidence, where she could go into depression and maybe suicide. because she's trapped and she's not well supported. Here comes the role of the government and the national NGOs to provide a system that really support these women. Whenever these women feel that there is a system, that there is trust in it, there is confidentiality, there is a quality of service, these women will start reporting. And this is the thing that we saw in Zaatari camp, for example. Women that are faced with the sexual harassment, when they felt that the services are there, they started reporting back. And this is one advice to provide to ensure a higher support. Unfortunately, these women who are faced with, who are victim, have a social problem. They can't reintegrate into society easily, and this impacts their economic power. So it is linked. Studies show that rape linked with economic power is really very high. Women who face such an issues don't tend to work, don't tend to ensure a high income, and here comes the question of the importance of services. However, I wanted to talk about the police component, and the police role is really very important. One, from the security, two, from the way that they are handling it. For example, in Lebanon, a woman who faced rape has to go to the police station, report first before getting therapy, and this is not something that is on the actual implementation very realistic. A woman who was sexually assaulted needs to be taken first to the hospital, then all the follow-up is and here comes the
reporting
importance.
and
exactly, not the vice versa. And those are small tips that require the cooperation and the understanding of the police stations, of the general security, to ensure a higher protection for women.
Now, allow me to interrupt you here, Ms. Zeina, and I'm going to go to my guest in Egypt, Mr. Mohanad. Mr. Mohanad, we in the studio talked about women and how we should raise awareness among women, how we should let them know that they should report and that it's not a taboo anymore. It shouldn't be a taboo, at least. Now, you in your organization in Basma, you talked also about awareness campaigns. What kind of awareness campaigns are we talking about? Can you elaborate? Can you give us more details about the activism, the work you're doing regarding raising awareness for women, and maybe raising awareness amongst men as well?
Well, I've already mentioned our work in the metro. What we do is basically two parts. One of them, we make patrols in the metro stations, and we make sure that women aren't sexually harassed while cooperating with the police. Aren't sexually harassed in the metro, and we raise awareness to both the women in the metro and the men in the metro, because sometimes you find out, like for example, men go into the women cars in the metro without knowing that they are for women. So these people get out of the car as soon as they know, but some men do not get out of the car. So like naturally, when we're there, we intervene, but we're not going to be there 24/7. So we raise awareness, we talk to women, telling them they cannot let go of their rights. They have to speak out for themselves. This is one project, the Metro project. We work throughout the year in the major holidays, like Eid, for example. We hold patrols in major squares like Talat Harb, and we raise awareness through campaigns, and we also do security patrols in the squares. One of the projects that we're working on is actually going to start next week, is raising awareness in universities. Okay. We're going to work with the universities themselves to raise awareness among college students. Not just raise awareness among college students, our aim is to recruit college students for the cause. Create a sort of a viral effect where each college student actually makes an impact within his local community. And we're not just focusing on Cairo, we're trying to expand, like to include all the governorates of Egypt, as much as our resources allow us to. And another part of our project is working in less than affluent areas, shabby areas in Egypt. For example, the microbus stations. We're going to go talk to the microbus drivers themselves, because lots of sexual harassment cases happen in the microbuses. We're going to raise awareness among the microbus drivers, convince them to step in, convince them they themselves to be an active agent in helping bringing an end to sexual harassment. Because most people actually see the microbus drivers as a part of the problem. We're trying to make them a part of the solution. We're trying to raise awareness between them, so they themselves raise awareness among the local community, and they provide a safe means of transportation for women, because most women in Egypt rely either on metro or microbuses and moving from between work and school and home.
Mr.
We're
Mohanna,
trying to actively pursue.
Mr. Mohanna, allow me to interrupt you here. Let me ask you this: when you're trying, let's say, when you did talk to women in the metro, and when you tried to talk to them and convince them, or to the men, what was the reaction? Did the women know about their rights? Did the women know that they can report? What was the reaction of men? I mean, a lot of reports, and I've been when you read. This sexual harassment and this little sentences and phrases that come out of men's mouth in Egypt, for example, it's normal and it's considered a regular norm. And the very simple answer is like, what's wrong with this sentence? I'm just flirting with her. I'm just letting her know she's beautiful. What is the reaction to your campaigns from the men or the women perceiving it?
Okay, naturally we receive different reactions. Lots of the women, as I've told you, there is a problem with the shame culture. If a woman gets harassed, she doesn't want to go to report it to the police because she feels then the victim actually feels that she is to blame. Sometimes, unfortunately, the parents do blame her. You shouldn't have gone out in that hour. You shouldn't have gone out dressed that way. You shouldn't have reported it. You shouldn't have made a scandal or made a scene. We're trying to talk to them and tell them, no, it's okay. They have to stand out for themselves. They have to stand up for themselves. They have to fight for the rights, for the simplest right of personal space, of being able to walk in the street, in the public transportations. And we talk to men as well. And we tried to let men know that it's not okay. There is a concept of personal space. There is a concept of when you're sexually harassing someone, it's not okay. It's not. There is a culture of normalization towards sexual harassment. We're trying to fight back this culture. It's not normal. It's not okay to sexually harass. It's a heinous offense, and you should understand that it's a heinous offense. And like we get faced with some objections. No, it's a woman's fault. Look at what she's dressing. She's asking for it. There is absolutely no excuse for sexually harassing someone.
Okay.
It's not about what she's wearing or what she's doing. It's about you.
Okay. Okay. Ms. Zeina, let's talk about the situation. Let's go now to a specific topic, which is Syrian women, and especially after the horrific events in the country. And all these women, as we mentioned before, are the most vulnerable, women and children, but specifically the women. And we've seen a lot of incidents in Lebanon of sexual harassment, exploitation, trafficking, using prostitution. What is the situation of these refugee women in the country now?
We know now that the numbers of the Syrian crisis, and this crisis have been the highest impact since Rwanda in '94 in terms of the impact of a crisis and the refugees, and we know that we have millions who went through. Mostly the highest numbers are in Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Iraq and Turkey. Some are in camps, some are outside the camps, and they are faced with very high vulnerability. Unfortunately, looking back at the places where they went, many people who flew were from rural areas of Syria. And originally there, early marriage was there. There is a report by UN Women who said that 51.3% of Syrian women already had early marriage in Syria. Attribution of education is not high, dropout is high, and women going, and even children, where they prefer to go and help their fathers into their work, and where we're seeing child labor. And at the same time, gender-based violence, which is really high. This is not only the case in Syria, this is the case in the Arab world. And we could see that with refuge, with emergency, where the man is in the tent, where he feels is incapable to provide an economic income, the reaction for it is to increase violence against his women and against his children. And we know that this is a circle of violence that goes, where the man is providing violence to women and the children providing the mother to the children, and it goes back. It's a cycle that never ends. And there is a need, and Mohanna yourself talked about the importance of raising awareness amongst men. And this is one success story that happened with an organization in Lebanon, where they started by raising awareness about men, about violence and its impact, and it worked. So there is a need to raise awareness and include men in these efforts to raise awareness about it. In camps, outside camps, survival sex have been detected as really high, and this is something worrying the governments, being Lebanon, Jordan, and even Egypt, where the numbers are high about the survival sex, that they call it, and it turns into prostitution later on. However, this is linked to human trafficking, unfortunately.
Ms. Zeina, I have to interrupt you here because we're going to take our second break. But after the break, we have bullet points that we need to tackle, and we will tackle this point. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned.
Around the world, outside the mainstream, anywhere, everywhere. A media of your land, of your creation. A new media in a new era. Will it take the lead in the future? I believe so. This is Underground.
Underground, when vague turns to clarity.
Pollution and climate change, medicine manipulation, genetically modified food, the destruction of wildlife, and corporate exploitation. These are all part of a new terrorism threatening our future.
Eco-terrorism, global awakening to a world under threat.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now, this is our last segment, the third segment, which is the bullet points that we usually project and we have a discussion about. Now, the first bullet point is about Egypt. Now, in Egypt, sexual violence, harassment, and trafficking combined with a breakdown of security, high rates of female genital mutilation, and a rollback of freedoms since the 2011 revolution put Egypt at the bottom of the poll. Now, 99.3% of women and girls are subjected to sexual harassment, 27.2 million women and girls, or 91% of the female population, are victims of female genital mutilation. Now, I would like to take your comment, Mr. Mohanad, on this point, and specifically genital mutilation. What are the stances, what are the views in the country about this phenomenon?
Unfortunately, somehow, FGM got associated with religion, which is a pseudo-religious excuse. It's not real. I mean, like the predominant religion in Egypt is Islam. And even in the Gulf, in the more conservative Wahhabi areas of the Arab world and the Islamic world, FGM isn't that common. It's more of an African and North African crime. That is like unbelievably widespread and associated with religion. I mean, there is no religious text saying that advocating FGM, but somehow this idea got instilled within the collective consciousness of the Egyptian population, which is something different organizations are trying to change. This isn't religion. This is simply a crime, a heinous crime against your daughters, against your women.
Mr. Mohanna, excuse me. Okay, let me interrupt you here. And since you mentioned the idea of religion, now a lot of people claim in the country, for example, that women who dress more appropriately, women who wear the hijab, are less prone to face with sexual harassment. How true is this statement?
Completely untrue and completely unfounded. Statistics, you cited one, the UN statistic. Actually, most of the women being harassed are women wearing hijab and in some cases niqab. This is when someone tells us is that it's the way women dress, we come back with these statistics. Actually, more women wearing, the percentage of the women wearing hijab is who were subjected to sexual harassment is much more than the percentage of women not wearing hijabs that were subjected to sexual harassment. Taking into account, of course, the differences in percentage between the women in Egypt wearing hijab and the women in Egypt not wearing hijab. Even taking this into account, the statistics show that there is no relation between what the women what women are wearing, and between them being subjected to sexual harassment.
It's in the mentality, it's in the mentality. Now, let's go to the second point about Syria. Now, massive war displacement, both inside Syria and across borders, has left millions of women and girls vulnerable to sexual violence and trafficking. Now, the United Nations says the collapse of the economy and healthcare system has disproportionately affected women. Girls as young as 12 have been married in refugee camps. More than 4,000 cases of rape and sexual mutilation have been reported to the Syrian Network of Human Rights. Now, we were talking about this before the break, how horrific these numbers are. And it's not only like 4,000 cases of rape reported. We don't know about the numbers that are not reported. These are the numbers reported. Now, what has to be done in this case, Ms. Zeina?
Unfortunately, the reported cases are very, very minimal in retrospect to the actual numbers, because looking at the Syrian culture, confidentiality is very high. And knowing that the rape, when it's happening within somebody who is from the neighborhood, and many times who's a relative. And we have seen many cases of rape where the family decided just to pack their stuff and leave because they don't want to have a hassle and know that the perpetrator is their relative. And this is really, and we're seeing this not only for women, we're seeing this to rape to minors, which is very grave. Unfortunately, the case study that conducted also UN Women showed that the rape to minors is much higher than the rape to women. And this is terrific, because a child living with the consequences of a rape when they're young is really big. And here we're talking about children of 2 or 5 or 4 years old, and this is massive on their impact. Mohanna talked about the role of the religion, and I think this is a very important topic, because we've seen that lots of legislations are coming out in the name of Islam and in the name of Sharia, where in fact they're really against international human rights law, and this is not acceptable. We've seen trends of things happening and allowing these things to happen. However, we have to be very careful that whatever legislation under the name of religion is very harmful to the development of societies, and the need for protection needs to be conducted. Talking about the case of Syrian refugees, women and children are faced with forced marriage. Some are willingness and some are against that, because here comes the component of finance. Parents are getting dowry for the marriage of their children, or sometimes the parents prefer that their girl is married to somebody they know, so that they form a new unit and they are considered as a family, and in retrospect they get food items and non-food items, forming a new family. So this is one reason why there. In addition of, when we're talking about camps and very high agglomeration of people, the security is very low, and children, and there are threats to it. And we've seen many women head of household who lost their husband in the fightings, who decided to leave the camps and go into rural areas because they feel that it's a higher protection for their girls.
Ms. Zainab, allow me to interrupt you here, because I want to take the same case to ask Mr. Mohanad. Mr. Mohanad, regarding the situation of Syrian refugees, we know there was a good proportion of Syrian refugees in Egypt. Now, what is the case of these refugees, specifically women and girls, and where do they stand in this combination that Egypt is going through, specifically when it comes to sexual harassment?
Unfortunately, some Syrian women, some Syrian refugees are being exploited sexually here in Egypt. Whether it was being exploited directly or through some sort of a facade, like an arranged marriage, they basically sell them out as commodities to be wed to all the men. And unfortunately, the situation for Syrian refugees here in Egypt is problematic at the moment. They're no different from the general culture of sexual harassment that's predominant in the country at the moment. But they're more at risk because of their conditions, because of them needing money to provide for their families, being unable to sustain themselves with minimal government aid given to them, And of course, you see that international aid agencies are already stretched thin as it is the resources. So they're unable to provide for the Syrian refugee families in Egypt. So they're forced, sometimes they're forced into arranged marriages, sexual slavery even. So the conditions aren't that good, and there are some organizations working towards improving these conditions, and there are also some organizations trying to pressure the government to step in actively to help put an end to the sexual exploitation of refugees.
Okay. Now the last bullet point is about Lebanon. Now Lebanon ranked badly for not punishing marital rape, for biased inheritance laws and discriminatory employment laws. No law prohibits sexual harassment in the workplace. 1 in 6 Lebanese women are illiterate. Now, Ms. Zeina, the case in Lebanon. Now let's talk about Lebanon here. Marital rape, it's not considered, like the law doesn't punish that. And harassment in the workplace goes unreported, or even if it's reported, it doesn't make a big buzz. What is the situation exactly in Lebanon?
In Lebanon, we have seen that the law against domestic violence did pass recently. However, the non-governmental organizations had more comments. They wanted it to a higher extent. But here is the request for enforcing this law. Same issue for the law of human trafficking, that we're very happy that in 2011 there was a law. However, it was not enforced yet and requires capacity building among the enforcers. If we take the case that took place in school in 2012, in July to June 2012, about the teacher who sexually harassed 11 of his children who were aged between 6 and 8 years. And it took a very high impact. However, that was one case among many that were not talked about. And the same issue about marital rape. It's not an issue of being underreported as much as an issue about awareness among women about the impact of this, awareness among men about the impact of this, and the need for the government to ensure a protection for it. Marital rape is an issue that is happening everywhere and to very high extent in the Arab world, and requires awareness about it and showing the good consequences and the positive consequences that could take place if this is preserved. Protecting women is not only about protecting women. Protecting women is about ensuring a better development, a more sane environment in the Arab world in general. Just wanted to add about what Mohanad was speaking. We know that Syrian refugees, the highest number are located in the area called 6 October, and most of them are in the Masakan Osman, where we saw and we interviewed women who preferred not to send their children to school because they were afraid that they are sexually harassed, because cases have been reported, and this is grave. And also we have seen about human trafficking, women who were the traffickers and who were bringing people from the Gulf to get married to Syrian minors. If they get married to her for like 2 weeks, and then they promise money to the parents, and then after that he gets married to her, he gets an apartment, and then he leaves her, and this girl is open to prostitution and deterioration of her life. Another issue that is happening in Lebanon, since we're talking about Lebanon, with the Syrian refugees, especially in the north, where we know we have tented settlements, unofficial tented settlements, we don't have camps, where we have a person called a shawish, who's a Syrian person who's taking charge of a group of unformed tented settlements, and who is facing the woman who is coming and telling her, if you want a tent with the equipment that are available, you have to give me money. And definitely she doesn't have money since she came with no school.
So in exchange there has to...
Exactly.
Okay. Now I'm going to take some final words. Mr. Mohanad, I'll take, please, in 1 minute. We've been very negative regarding Egypt, but is there a silver lining there among all this darkness? In 1 minute, please.
Yes, I believe that there is a silver lining. I think like the most important thing about the revolution is that it broke the psychological barriers, the existing psychological barriers that's preventing people from speaking out, taking action, and changing their society. And this is what we and other organizations and movements are capitalizing on. that there is a rock that moves the still water in the pond.
Okay.
That we are actively working towards a change.
Okay.
And we believe it is possible.
Thank you. And you're doing a great job, by the way. Ms. Zeina, final words from you. Like it starts from women and men, and it starts in the mind. How can we change this in 1 minute, please?
There are efforts that needs to be required on 2 levels. First one is for the support of the victim of sexual harassment, and the second one is in the prevention. Support to victims first goes by providing quality services to therapy, providing an efficient referral system, prosecution of the perpetrators first, ensuring that there is a law enforcement to be considered and criminalizing what is happening, empowerment measures for victims, and legal support. Whereas in prevention, we have to ensure that NGOs continue the effort that they're doing, that gender security has capacity building in terms of how to deal with victims of trafficking and sexual harassment. Big role of the schools and international institutions to raise awareness about their component, the role of the parents in terms of guidance about this issue, and the role of the religious leaders to support and protect this component.
Thank you very much, Zeina Mohanna, for being with us. And also, I would like to thank our guest in Egypt, Mr. Mohanad El-Sangary. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the case of sexual harassment. We need a change. We need a change in our brain, men and women. Thank you very much for watching. See you next week. Bye-bye.